Another game with colourful loot. Here we go again. Godfall was a launch title for the PS5 and it also released for the highly respected Epic Games Store. It sold for £70 at launch for the base edition and up to £100 for the Ascended edition, which, well, fuck that. The game has dropped significantly in price since then. You can get the base edition for around £30 or lower, but is it actually worth your time and money? Let's see. The story of Godfall is incredibly generic. You are Orin, brother of Macros. Macros wants to become a god, you're not happy with that life choice, so you fight him and get your dick kicked in. With this, the game begins, and throughout you become more powerful by picking up shiny coloured loot and levelling up. The game ends with you defeating Macros. Other than the two brothers, you have the Seventh Sanctum, your guiding voice, and Xenon, a merchant character and a friend of Orin. The story is just a means to an end to get to the end game, and it's not that interesting, so let's move on. The gameplay of Godfall is a hack and slash looter slasher, the first of its kind, didn't you know? Looter slasher basically means instead of shooting enemies, you're hitting them with a giant fancy sword instead. The basic combat is very God of War, the new one. Very close third person camera. You are equipped with a Valor Plate, which I'll explain a little bit more later, a retractable shield that you can throw around as a weapon, and two main weapons of your choosing. Fighting enemies, you'll be switching from light attacks to heavy attacks, as well as using weapon techniques, which are specific moves tied to particular weapons. There's a few ways to actually dispatch of an enemy. The normal means just whittle down its health, a soul break, which requires you to fill up the enemy's health bar to a more cracked health bar, and then you use a heavy attack or a heavy weapon technique, which will just get rid of that specific part of the health bar. If you kill an enemy this way, it'll make them explode. Very satisfying. You can also take down an enemy by stunning them or breaching them, as the game calls it, which will let you just do a takedown move. These are useful, but I find them super underwhelming. Finally, you can death blow an enemy, which will happen when you hit an enemy's weak point. Their weak points are signified with a bright coloured light on a certain part of their body. Weak points aren't available at all times, but it's very worth hitting them when they are. With the way the game plays and the perspective it has, hitting an enemy's weak point does require you to aim. Not like some games where perhaps their weak points are their back, so just hit them there. You'll have to actually aim your swing. The weapons in the game are standard, but unique in their own ways. We've got swords, greatswords, polearms, hammers and dual blades. All of them have their own set of weapon techniques, and finding what works for you and for your build is part of the endgame fun. Another big part of Godfall's gameplay are its Valor Plates, the armor sets. You unlock the Valor Plates by gathering resources in mission areas, and if you're snooping around you should own every Valor Plate by the end. Each one has its own Archon Fury, the ultimate. Like Marvel's Avengers, I didn't find any particularly impressive. They are more so used in conjunction with a build, so rather than an instant win button, you'll have to know what you want to get out of it. The combat itself does flow quite nicely, blocking, parrying are all super satisfying. Overall, the combat in the game is just super fun. The game's level cap is 50, with the primal update we got the introduction of ascension levels. Through your journey to level 50 you'll gain skill points which you can use to buy extra moves and increase stats. You can remove all skill points at any point if you find yourself fancying a different build, at no cost, which is always nice. The ascension levels are just more stat increases to make yourself more powerful. So content wise the game offers a story adventure to play through, which will mainly just teach you the mechanics of the game and introduce you to all the bosses and enemies of the game. Through the story you'll explore three main landscapes of the game, a fieldy plains with some ruins in them, an underwater area with lots of pretty fauna in it, and finally a desert area that's not boring. Within these areas monsters are flung about the terrain, secrets in the form of lore books, material collectibles called motherlodes, and bodies of fallen valor warriors. There are also loot chests around, either by stumbling upon them, killing a strong enemy for them, or doing a puzzle where you have to find a few blue lanterns around, breaking them to unlock the chest. You'll also have hunts to help you loot up, which will just ask you to kill a certain mini-boss. Enemies in the game are specific to most areas in the game and hold their own skill sets and types within. Enemies from the starter zone, the plains, are pretty easy to fight, but once you get to the desert area, the enemies become a lot tougher. Once the main story is finished, you'll enter the end game. Dreamstones will be your first task as they help you level up, learn bosses, and earn more gear. To access a dreamstone you'll need to spend Electrum, the game's currency, Once entered, you'll have one of the game's main bosses as your end goal. You'll need to do some side hunts to unlock hints on the boss's weaknesses or strengths, or you'll gain certain perks to help you defeat the boss. The bosses in the Dreamstones are a lot tougher than they were in the main game, so you'll have a massive fight on your hands, so learn the mechanics of the boss and bring some really good gear. This is where you'll start wanting to think of a build. So once you've hit level 50, you can either stick to Dreamstones to keep going on with tougher challenges, or venture into the Tower of Trials. This is a floor-based tower to fight through. This is where the good shit is, and where it gets really tough. You'll have waves of enemies to fight through. The quicker you do it, the more keys you'll unlock. Once completed, you'll have a choice of doors to go through. Depending on what you choose, you'll gain a piece of gear if you chose a weapon door, or you'll gain a buff if that's what you chose. Chests require keys to open, so get through the waves as quick as possible. This tower used to be like 100 floors, correct me if I'm wrong, but after the primal update they've condensed it down to 30, so it gets harder super quick. Now myself, I'm really struggling to get through it. Also after the primal update you'll have to choose a negative boon at some point. That'll increase loot by a certain amount, so for examples enemies will have shields or be enraged. The endgame content to Godfall is fun and challenging, and I found it a lot more interesting than running through the same slog of missions like recent looter games. The mission variety is not crazy or wild, but it's short. You'll just be required to fight through a boss or a couple waves of enemies, but unless you put the time into it you won't be blasting through these mindlessly. Loot itself is the normal. Fancier colours offer better damage and perks. You can now gain primal gear, which I guess is super awesome gear. The game does have multiplayer, but no matchmaking, which is bizarre. The community from what I've seen is requesting this by the hour, but as of yet we have nothing. Very strange for an online only game. Graphically, the game is very good. With this being a PS5 launch title, I'd fucking hope so. Everything is bright and colourful and very shiny. Also runs surprisingly well. Not 60 all the time, but it's up there. Worlds do just feel like a means to an end. Other than Macros, the final boss arenas do just sort of seem to be there without reason or connection to the boss. But it's not something that bogs the game down. Overall, Godfall isn't what I expected to play after all the very myah reviews. While the story is bland, the combat and the endgame trials more than make up for that. The game does feel very small in scale compared to something like Destiny or The Division, but I think it works in the game's favour. For the 70 quid they were originally asking for, no, I don't think this game's worth that, but the game is regularly on sale and may even stay low. And the game basically has no microtransactions. Other than different additions, it is just, you get what you get. So if you like fancy coloured loot, sword combat, or even if you liked what you see here, give it a go. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.